The King is Dead, second edition. So this is second edition of a strategy game that I played a couple of years ago, and I really enjoyed it. It's simple, so it could be a gateway game for somebody who just is entering the hobby. It's very deep, while remaining simple. It has something remarkable. It's possibly the only game that I know where passing is fun. I think I said this in the original review of the first edition. Passing was never this much fun. Passing is that kind of thing that is like non-playing. Now in this game you have a limited number of options during the game, limited number of actions. So a lot of times you'll be passing, but passing precisely because of that becomes significant. It's an interesting choice, because you're maybe, biding your time, hedging your bets, waiting for the right moment to play one of those few precious actions that you have in the game. Also, passing triggers certain effects. So if nothing else, in the history of game design, there's something fascinating here, because they managed to make passing interesting, to make passing an actual, relevant, tense, exciting action. All right. This second edition changes the look of several of the components, starting from the cover, which has now this like illuminated manuscript feel to it, and I like it very much. I like it more than the original game. They also upgraded a couple of other components, or changed them at least. They also change gameplay by giving you optional cards. So if you want, you can play the original game with the second edition, but you can also alter the composition of the cards to play a variant that adds more variety, more randomness also. But let me show you how the game works and what you find. The new board is structurally the same as the old one, which is a simplified map of medieval England with different areas, with different names, and just structurally it's exactly the same. However, the map now looks a lot busier, and I'm not a big fan. I think I like the board of the previous game. It looks less flashy, but precisely also because of that, it's a lot more readable. Because what you're gonna do with this board is you're gonna put wooden cubes on them. And which cube is where is very important. Cubes are identified only by their color. And I don't know that the game is really playable easily by colorblind players, but simply there isn't as much contrast between the cubes and the background here as there used to be, and that is not that great. So again, it's not that it's impossible or invisible, but I prefer, for a game where the majority of cubes in a region is so important, I prefer more contrast. I prefer a more neutral background, as you have in the first edition. So here we have three different groups. So we have the Scots, the Welsh, and the English that are gonna fight for control. At the beginning of the game, you're gonna place cubes on the map. Some cubes are gonna be allocated based, giving majority to certain region, and then you simply fill the map by placing 4 random cubes, so making sure that you have 4 random cubes in each region. The players, basically these 3 groups, are gonna fight for control, and it's not like one of those games where you are one of them. You are the Lannister or the Scottish or the Baratheon or the Welsh. You manipulate them all, and you want then to have influence over the group that will control England at the end. Each player also receives 2 cubes at the beginning of the game. They represent their initial court. Then we have these cards here. We have 3 types of cards. One is the cards that will go in the hands of the players for the standard game. Then you have the optional cards that are new to the second edition. And then you have cards that simply indicate the regions. You shuffle these cards randomly and you place them around the board. You see there's number slots here that go from 1 to 8, and those are also the 8 regions that we have on the board. There you go, just like so. Then each player will receive a hand of 8 cards that are all exactly the same. And with those, every player having those 8 identical cards, this is how you play the original game. So when it is your turn, what you can do is you pass or you play a card, as simple as that. When you play a card, you do what it says based on the icons here. Say, for example, here I can put down 2 English cubes next to a region controlled by the English. At the beginning of the game, no region is controlled by anybody specifically. Here I can switch any 2 cubes with 1 cube in another region. Switch 1, blah, 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 blah. Change the location of 2 cards around the board, add 1 cube per color on the board, and this is pretty much what you do. You play a card, you do what it says. And also very important, after you play a card and resolve the effect, you take any 1 cube from the board and you add it to your court. When you pass, you pass. Again, you will want to do that quite a bit because you only have 8 cards, you only have 8 action for the entire game. When everybody passes in a row, then you go and check, in a power struggle, you check the power, check who has control of the region with the lowest number that has not been adjudicated yet. So for example, here we have the the Lancaster. We're gonna check that because everybody just passed. And we see that in Lancaster, the English have majority. So we remove all cubes and we put an English control cube there. Then we continue going around and everybody passes again. Now it's time to check this region here. This time the Welsh have control and we place their cube there. And so on and so forth. If there is a tie in a region, say, oh, we are just checking this region now. When there is a tie, no clear majority emerges in the local forces. The French, they're always paying attention, they're always looking for those stalemates, will expand their influence. So when there's a tie, you're gonna place a black disc there. The game can end in one or 2 ways. Either the French place 3 cubes on the board. Remember, the French are a non-playing faction, in which case the game ends in an invasion. So there are 2 possible outcomes to the game: invasion or coronation. The French placed 3 cubes, so there were 3 stalemates. Then the game ends in an invasion, and the winner is the player with the highest number of complete sets of followers in their court. For example, this player has 1, this player has 0 right now. If the French arrive, it's better to be friends with everybody. Otherwise, if all regions are controlled by, if all regions have been checked, then you're gonna see which of the 3 parties has majority, is the strongest. Suppose, for example, that the English have the most regions that they control after all 8 regions have been checked, then the Scottish, then the Welsh. Once you have determined that, then the player with the most cubes of the most powerful region, of the most powerful party, wins the game. For example, this is the situation. Yellow wins. I have a lot of those in my court, and my poor opponent only has 1. Blah, blah, set trombone for that because I win the game. So this is the idea. In the standard game, you play with everybody having an identical hand of cards. The biggest change here in terms of gameplay is that now you have these other cards, these intrigue cards that have different effects, and you will, when you play with these optional cards, you remove some cards from the original hands that you give to the players and you replace them with these ones. That means that now the players are not all going to have exactly the same deck as before. What you're going to have is asymmetrical effects. That also means that there's going to be a little more work that your players are going to have to learn Iconese. That is, at the beginning of the game, everybody will look at this section of the rule book so that you know what your unique cards do. But again, the good thing is that it's a one-time thing. At the beginning of the game, you look at your hand, you look at your variable cards, you learn those effects, and that's it, because you don't draw cards in the game. The ones that you get at the beginning of the game are the ones that you have for the rest of the game. And so there is that fact there. You can think of this as extending setup, but the result is that you have more uncertainty. You cannot count cards. You can try to infer what unique cards the opponents have, but you never know for sure. And so that's an interesting thing. The game becomes, well, there's more cunning and more intrigue, precisely because not everybody has the same cards every game.
The King is Dead was a fun game when it originally came out, and you can still play it with the new version. It's like, oh, it's retro active, retro compatible, whatever you kids call consoles these days. So you can still play The King is Dead with this new edition, which means if you saw something that you liked in my introduction, if it seems to be like an appealing game to you and you haven't played the original edition, then I recommend you pick up this one, because then you have both versions, the classic versions and basic version and the optional version, so to speak. However, the board, at least to me, is a little too cluttered, is a little less functional than the original one. I think I liked the original one because it still looked nice and elegant and clean to me. But other than that, what is good is that you have the classic game here, which is really solid. It's tense because it's based on a dilemma, on a paradox almost. In order for you to have a strong court in a certain that represents the winning group, you're weakening the group on the board. By taking actions now, you're reducing your chances of taking actions later. Everybody's a finite number of actions, and so you burn all of your resources early on. You gain that lead, but then everybody else still has a lot of actions and they're gonna take the lead away from you. So it really is a game of balance between the forces there and the force at your court, what you can do now, what you can do later. And again, I guess if you play it a million times, then you get into the counting cards idea, that you really are able to keep track of what everybody has. Oh, she played that card and that card, therefore, you know, that other card is coming and I can counteract that. But then again, everybody's on the same boat. If everybody's doing the mental card counting sort of thing, that is fine. However, the good thing with the new edition is that at that point you have this extra mystery that has to do with the variable powers, with the non-symmetrical resources that people are playing with. Now the rulebook says that actually the idea of the design was that you play to the point that you're going to deduce what the people have in their hand based on what they do or don't do. I don't know that how many people, with the exception of the designer, maybe will get to that point. And if you do, I'm thinking, well, then just go back to the original game. If you're functionally playing in a framework where everybody knows what everybody has in their hands, then you just skip the hard work. You see, if you decrypt the secret messages exactly as the original message, then why encrypt it to start with? But again, I don't think many people will get to that point. I think functionally, for most people, for all intents and purposes, it will be a game with unpredictable elements. It'll be a game of surprises. And so the cunning cards really add that flavor that you do not know exactly what the opponent is going to do. For some people, then maybe will feel like too much luck, too much randomness involved. Maybe you'll feel that depending on the composition of cards that you get at the beginning, you will have more chances, fewer chances. but I haven't seen that being a problem really. I played it with my daughters, I played it with my wife. Yes, we were able to convince mom to also join us in a game, which also tells you, and she wasn't all that happy about learning about all those icons at the beginning, but that tells you the game is gateway level. You can play it with people that are very young, like my daughters that are currently 8 and 9, or and 10, I mean, or you can play it with people that are tough judges of games and don't play often. That would be my wife. And yet she still enjoyed it. And again, she doesn't like learning new games, and she doesn't like learn a lot of icons. But with the fact that you only have to look at those things at the beginning of the game, and here's the rule book, keep it next to you so you can check it anytime you want. And those icons are well designed because they tend to be pretty intuitive, so even somebody who is not particularly into strategy games or into iconese, this weird language that we all understand, although no one can actually utter it. Even somebody, again, who is not a committed gamer can play and enjoy the game. So The King is Dead is a very unique game because they weaponized passing. They made passing cool. They made it an interesting decision. So it's again with a unique flow, very simple rules, slightly more complex if you play the optional version with the cunning cards, with the non-identical decks for everybody, and yet it still works. It's still very simple, and it is very deep, and it has some very interesting dilemmas. So I enjoyed the second edition because it has all of the good things that they found in the previous edition, which I already like very much, plus with more game modes now, with more replay value, with more variety. So definitely a positive endorsement from me.